Hi everyone, welcome back to Fleecimals Friday. I'm Michelle with Fleecimals, here to teach you some life skills with sewing and crafting. In today's video, I'll be going over the sewing essentials as well as some splurges and my favorite sewing tools to get you started. Alright, so when it comes to sewing, what do you need? You need needles. So these needles you can pick up in pretty much any single large retailer, as well as dollar stores, super centers, and craft stores alike. This is probably going to be your cheapest option. It's got lots of different assorted sizes, and each of these slots would be full. These are not my favorite. I like to go for the size 9 needles. These would be found at your local sewing store. They're very sharp, they're very small, they glide through fabric very easily. So for what I do, I really love these needles. The quality is really great, and it comes with a lot in a pack, which I really love because I will lose them, or I'll have 6 needles going at the same time with different threads, and I don't want to cut new threads. So when it comes to your essentials versus your splurges, the difference in price here is probably only going to be about $1 or $2. So if you're just starting out, getting an assorted pack is really great because you can learn what needle size is best for you, and then you can then splurge and get a full pack of that size. Next is pins. When it comes to sewing pins, there are so many different sizes, colors, different patterns. Some of them have flat heads versus the round, and then you've also got dress pins. But talking about just the ball head pins, these packs come in assorted colors. They come with a lot in them, and they're quite affordable. Pins are really great for attaching your 2 pieces of fabric together and stabilizing it, making sure that your stitch lines are exactly where you want them to be. I actually don't use these pins. I use these exclusively for my bulletin board because they are pretty colors. The pins that I use are these pins. These are glass head pins, and they come in what I could have found 2 different sizes. But the beauty of these is, 1, they have a smaller head. 2, I've never had one of these balls pop off during sewing. The plastic ones can pop off. And 3, and the most important thing, and the reason why quilters love these so much, is because since they're glass, they're heat protected. You can iron with these. So if you pin a project together and realize, oh, I still need to press this seam, you can just take your project to your ironing board. You don't have to take out all your pins, or you don't have to carefully iron around them. With these plastic pins, you can actually melt them into the fabric. Another great option are quilting clips. So these are just tiny little clips that are flat on one side and curved on the other to clip 2 pieces of fabric together. So when you're sewing, you can just clip them on, just like a binder clip, essentially. They do come in a large pack. I believe this one was about 100 clips, and they come in 2 different sizes. I rarely use the large size, but the small size comes in handy a lot. So either using pins or clips, these are the ones that I recommend. But you'll find some really great essentials anywhere. Next is your marking tools. So when it comes to marking tools, the cheapest option, and the one that I learned from my mother, is using a white bar of soap. This is actually from a hotel, so it was free. And as you can see, it has a broken, sharp edge. That's really important for marking your fabric, so you get a clean edge. If I were to use this round side, you don't really know where your line is. So this is a really great, sometimes free option, especially when your bar of soap gets so tiny and so thin that you can barely use it when you're showering. This is a great way to use up that little bit of waste. Another option, especially if you have kids, is going to be chalk. Now, chalk usually has a very flat edge when you first get it, and you can also sharpen it with a knife. And this as well just marks fabric very well, and it just dusts away. Between the two of them, I like the soap because if you really need to get it out, if you wash it, the soap's going to come out. The chalk does too, but I prefer the soap. When it comes to lighter colored materials, I like to use a fabric marker. So this specific fabric marker has a water-soluble side as well as an air-soluble side. So if you're marking something and you just need to mark it quick, sew it right away, and you don't have to worry about wetting it later, the air-soluble side is great. And then both of them are water-soluble, so if you need to get rid of them, you can spritz it with some water. Or sometimes I'll have a cup of water handy, and I'll just dip my finger in and run it along that edge. So this is really great for lighter fabrics, because sometimes your chalk, it's there, but it's really difficult to see, as well as your soap is easier to see than this chalk, but it still can be difficult. Like, obviously, out of these 4 lines, the 2 that stand out are going to be the marker. So if you were to finish your project and you needed to wipe it away, I'll dip my finger in some water, and it looks like it kind of expands a little bit. But as you can see, the blue one is already gone. This purple one will start to fade slowly after adding water. It's like magic, essentially. So as for these tools, I would say the soap is the most essential and probably the easiest you're going to find. These pens can range anywhere from $5 to $10. They're very handy to have, and I wouldn't discount them. But if you're just starting out, a bar of soap will do you good. And if you're continuing on and you're sewing like me for the past 20 years, I have all of these, and I reach for the soap sometimes because I have a dark fabric, or I just need that really crisp white line. So these are essentials that I have all the time, all around. Definitely these two. So up next is your thimble. Now, like I said, I've been sewing for almost 20 years. So I started sewing when I was 5. When I was 5 years old, I did not use a thimble. I thought they were clunky, I thought they were silly, and my mom really only had those metal ones that you've seen, like in the Monopoly game. But as I grew older, I realized that with my very sharp needles that I like to use, as I'm pushing my needle through my fabric, I'm using my middle finger and I'm pushing against this pad. When I was younger, I thought that thimbles were mainly to protect your fingers underneath your fabric. So what I use is this silicone and plastic thimble. I got it at a local fabric store. And what's really great about it is the thimble locks into the needle so you have better pressure and it won't fall away. And I honestly have no idea how I sewed for probably about 16 years without using a thimble, because I can barely sew without it now. So when it comes to a thimble, this is my absolute favorite. Obviously, when you buy a sewing kit, it's going to come with one of those little metal ones or a plastic one. I never found those comfortable or helpful. These are less than $5 and definitely worth the splurge. As an essential, you could probably start off hand sewing without one, because you're not going to be sewing constantly. It's probably only going to be a repair, fixing a button, fixing a hole in or a tear, so you can sew without it. But if your aim is to sew frequently or make your own clothes or just anything that would allow you to sew multiple days a week, I definitely recommend spending the extra couple of bucks and getting one of these. I actually have 3 of them because I misplace them because I use them so often. I'm pretty sure I have one in the front hallway right now. So I definitely recommend that. Now, you've seen this piece in the past couple of items. This is my magnetic pin cushion. A lot of pin cushions, you've seen the little tomatoes. They come in a lot of different styles. You just take your pin and you plunk it in, or pop it in essentially. But this is just one large magnetic pin cushion. So it used to have a base as well as a lid, but I didn't find those as helpful as without, so I just leave it as this piece. This is really great for when you're sewing rapidly and you're just sewing off the machine and you're tossing needles. That happens more times than not, and I don't have to worry about stopping my machine, putting it into the pin cushion, and continuing. It also has this great ridge for if you need to pick up a lot of your needles all at the same time. And if you drop needles on your floor or your carpet, what I usually do is I use the back to clean up. So especially in my sewing room, there's bound to be at least 3 pins on the floor at any given time. So careful trespassers, you will be poked. So this is a really great tool for cleaning up in that regard too. One of the other reasons that I like to leave it blank is to hold my sewing snips. So they clip right to the back because it's magnetic, and it just holds everything really well for when I go and sew on the go. As you've probably seen in past videos of my father's, he has a little magnetic dish which you can get at hardware stores. They're essentially the same thing, just different purposes, so designed a little bit differently. You can definitely use one of those. You could also, if you just had a large magnet, you could use one of those as well. So any type of pin cushion is great, or you're going to have to try to keep fitting all your pins back in a little pin box, and that is just a no-go for me. So a next little splurge is called Thread Magic. This is something I sewed without most of the time of my sewing, but it has come in handy later on. So let me just grab a piece of thread really quick. So essentially, what Thread Magic is, as well as you could get beeswax and different other alternatives, is it takes the thread and lubricates it. So you take it and you push it through one end and you pull it out the other, and it puts a very thin lubrication on your thread to make hand sewing easier and smoother. I found that this is helpful if you're hand sewing a lot, but it's not necessarily a necessity. So it is closer to $10 in that range, but I've had this for probably close to 2 years, and I don't think I will probably go through it. I think it's one of those staples that once you have it, you don't really need to get a new one, and you can flip this little pad around. So it is a great splurge item to get, especially with hand sewing. So when it comes to sewing, you need to also cut. So I'm going to pull out my very large container of scissors. No, I don't have a problem. I just need to cut a lot of things. I have a lot. I won't lie. But there's also a variety of what I have. So we have what we went over first was our thread snips. I also have a handful of really small scissors. These 2 Gengar metal scissors are really sharp and really great for cutting like small fleece pieces. And then I have these other scissors were a part of a set when I was younger. Essentially, some of these scissors have just come into my life, and I haven't seen a reason to get rid of them because they work. Why not keep them? So these are picking shears. They're great for cutting frayable fabric like cotton or like cotton that frays apart. This will help stop that if you're not going to finish every edge. Now, the reason that I have so many scissors and shears is because you use them in different ways. So there is an old wives' tale that you should never cut paper with sewing shears. It'll dull the shears, they say. Well, this was just something to say so that way kids would stop using their mother's most expensive pair of shears for crafts and art. It turns out that paper really doesn't do anything to this. If this pair of scissors can cut through thick fabric and wool, a piece of paper is not going to harm it. What is going to harm these scissors is tapes and adhesives. So that's why I have shears as well as sticky scissors. So you can actually hear them get stuck with all the tape and glue that these scissors have cut, whereas these shears are nice and clean and sharp and concise. So another reason why I've had these is because it's more of a growing collection. As you start to sew, you're going to try different tools, you're going to collect different tools, and this is one of the things that I just kept collecting. So these pairs were just craft scissors that I got as sets when I was younger. These are just plain scissors that I've had from college that are great for cutting tape and glue and such like that. And then these pairs are all fabric shears. This pair is a pair that I use for most paper crafts because it cuts paper just so smoothly, so I don't usually use this one for fabric. We've already gone over the pinking shears, and that leaves these 3 pairs. So the first pair I got was actually this large one because I had already had these small scissors. So with this large one, this is an extra sharp, extra long pair of shears, which is really good for cutting long strides of fabric all at once. So when you're cutting, you can really cut in less cuts. So this is one that I tried. I really enjoyed it. I used this as my main pair of shears for the longest time. And then there was a splurge item, and that was these shears. Now these are the 7-inch Ginger shears. They do come in larger sizes, I believe up to 10 inches or maybe even larger. But if you get an all metal pair of shears, they're going to be heavier. And I have tiny wrists, so I decided to get a smaller pair of shears. And then these were just a gift that was passed along to me, and this is just the Fiskars brand of their regular shears. So these two would probably be most comparable. There is nothing like cutting with a pair of Gingers. There is any sewer that has a pair is probably mostly going to use that pair, if not only use that pair. So if you're just starting out, be sure that you do have a pair of tape and glue scissors and a pair of shears. In total, this will probably cost you under $30, but you don't want to use plain scissors for fabric. And one of the reasons why is because you can't get your scissors as close to your table and as close to your fabric edge as you can with shears. Shears are also usually going to be sharper, but the reason that scissors are different is because when they cut against a flat table, they have this really large gap, whereas if you use shears, it's a very, very small gap. So it keeps a piece of fabric flatter onto the table and your cuts more accurate. So for essentials, I would definitely pick up these. For splurge items, you do not need as many as I have, I will say that. If you're going to expand your collection, if you're starting to expand into frayable materials, a pair of pinking shears is probably a really great idea. I've bought this one a couple of years ago, and I rarely use it, but when I need it, it's a great tool to have. A splurge item I would definitely recommend is a pair of Gingers. Knowing what I know now, these pair of the razor sharp Fiskars, comparatively to their regular ones, is a price increase. I wish I would have just waited, saved the money, and gotten this pair. And then when it comes to small pairs, these are all Ginger as well. So my thread snips are great for getting into little tiny spots, cutting your thread, and they're very lightweight and easy to carry around. And then these little guys are perfect for when I need to cut a really small piece of fabric, especially most of the time when I'm cutting a circle of fabric. These are just really great to have in your hands. They're very smooth when cutting, and I don't have to carry this really large pair of shears for cutting something so small. So these are my recommendations. You can get smaller pairs as well, but when it came to Gingers, I did start with just one of these and then moved to having the snips and then the larger pair. So for an essential, you can just get plain scissors, but I would recommend either getting a small pair of clipper snips, or just splurging a little bit and getting one of these pairs of really sharp scissors. Other brands might have them as well, that you can start off with as too. So on the basis of cutting, when you have a large surface to cut on and a large piece of fabric, a rotary cutter is just a great tool to have. When I'm cutting a large pattern piece, this is the tool that I use. I do have 2 different rotary cutters, and I've used a lot in the past. This one is my favorite. It's the most ergonomic for my hand. It has this nice little button that you can open just a little bit if you're cutting light fabric, a little bit more for thicker, or just open all the way. It's nice to have a safety because rotary cutters are very sharp. The blade on these is sharper than most shears and most X-Acto knives that you're going to use. So I definitely recommend this pair. And you're going to need a cutting mat. I started off with a small clear cutting mat, but I upgraded to this large 36 by 24 inch cutting mat. These are pricey, but definitely worth it. And they're 2-sided. So if you really cut a lot, you can move to the other side, but it's a great crafting surface. It's great for measuring. I just recommend these mats as well. And for cutting with a rotary cutter, you're going to need a ruler most of the time. You can get long metal rulers, but my favorite is a plastic ruler, an acrylic ruler like this. This was an old Fiskars ruler. You can barely see some of the lines on here. This is the 3.5 inch by 18.5, which I really love, having this extra little purple of a 1/2 inch because sometimes I just need to cut a little bit of a 1/2 inch. So when laying down your fabric, and I usually do this standing up, I align, let's say this is my straight edge, align it to the mat, then take my ruler and align that on top, open up my rotary cutter, and it just cuts so smooth and so straight. So this is also a recommendation, but this would come a lot later. Start with your shears, start with those, and then you can move your way up to a rotary cutter. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Fleecimals Friday, where I went over some of my favorite essentials as well as splurges for sewing. If you have any questions, just let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!